Good afternoon. Today we're going to talk about redistribution of newly created wealth. And this is part of a three-pronged approach, because last night we had, in Building D, we were lucky to have Commissioner De Gucht, who talked to us about that issue. And it needs to be said, just before he was about to leave for Russia, along with another 16 European commissioners to have talks there. It needs to be stressed that these talks had been arranged a long time in advance, and so it was not a knee-jerk reaction to the current developments. This morning, writing a couple of notes relative to the lecture, something that crossed my mind was that reproach we've made to the people in Constantinople at the time of it was besieged by the Turks and the city was about to fall, that they were supposedly discussing about how many angels you can put on the tip of a pin. In one of my books, Comment la vérité et la réalité furent inventées, I explained why the subject was not so futile, because it turns out that answering questions set in that colorful way is actually essential to the way that we actually now interpret the world. But we understand what is meant. We understand that what is meant is that people may be totally oblivious of the gravity of the situation around them and still keep talking about things in general principles. So what I thought, having had that thought, I thought, why not discuss the issue within my lecture, focusing on the current news. Yesterday, Mr. De Gucht had written his paper beforehand, and he gave us a lecture which was about 20 to 25 minutes. But in the discussion, the 1 hour discussion that ensued, it was impossible not to discuss the current crisis, which once again looks like it's engulfing the Eurozone. One of my colleagues here, before the talk started, suggested that I meditate a passage from Rousseau's Du Contrat Social, and having read what he drew my attention on, I think it is topical that I do start the lecture by reading it. Under bad governments, this equality is only apparent and illusory. It serves only to keep the pauper in his poverty and the rich man in the position he has usurped. In fact, laws are always of use to those who possess and harmful to those who have nothing, from which it follows that the social state is advantageous to men only when they have something and none too much. The immediate connection is to the approach that was developed on Friday, that was expressed by the president of Cyprus, Mr. Anastasiades, as far as I remember, which was that to deal with the current difficulties of that nation, which I need to remind you is one of the 17 constituting, being part of the Eurozone, that nation is in dire straits as far as the not only the sovereign debt, the debt that's been issued by the country itself, but also of its two main banks, which are on the brink of insolvency. The country is in that difficult position. It has, as you know, historical ties to Greece, which has been very much in the spotlight starting in 2010. The solution in the case of Greece to its financial difficulties was a set of measures proposed by the so-called troika. The troika is a three-instance team. Looks like there's a quite large number of people coming in. Looks like we're doubling the size of the audience. The troika is a three-member team which is constituted by the European Commission, International Monetary Fund, and the Central European Bank. And they will come up together with some measures that they suggested Greece should impose in order to improve its economy. These measures have not been very successful so far. They produced a recession in the country rather than uplifting its economy. And at the end of 2011, for the first time since the beginning of the crisis, which started 2007, 2008, a partial default has taken place on the Greek debt. Greek debt means simply that the country needs to borrow, and it issues obligations, debt instruments, and some lenders lend some money to the country. In this case, there was a deal. I think there was a discount of, as far as I remember, 53 cents to the euro, but that with additional measures like a rescheduling of the debt, it ended up that the discount was about 80%, and that therefore there was a quite major loss for the lenders. The situation of Cyprus is somewhat special, although I will immediately put some other figures together that show you it's not as special as sometimes claimed currently. It has a major financial industry. The size of the financial industry in terms of capital mobilized is 8 times that of the GDP of their country, meaning the average creation of economic wealth over a year. That seems amazingly large. We've seen other countries at the beginning of the crisis being very much exposed for that particular reason. We remember about Iceland, which had a very, very large financial sector compared to the economy of the island. I remind you that the number of Icelanders, citizens of Iceland, is only 300,000, which is that of a, I would say, average size town, city. When I say 8 times the size of the economy for Cyprus, I need to immediately add that Luxembourg, for Luxembourg, the factor is 21. I've known at some point a figure for Belgium, but Belgium also, as you know, and you remember that particularly when there's been discussion about Dexia, that Belgium is also in the situation of having a very large financial sector compared to the size of the economy. Cyprus likes to call itself an international financial center, but there's another less, what I say, less positive way of talking of an economy like it's often called a tax haven. What does that mean? It means that the deposits on bank accounts in a country from non-residents, from people who are living outside of the country, are very large compared to those of the current resident of the country. And the tax haven is actually quite easy to delineate, to say if a country is a tax haven or not. If you ask the officials of the country, they will say, no, you know, we just have an important financial sector industry. But if you look in the regulations, in the laws within a country, different countries, you will see that if the status, the financial, fiscal situation of non-residents is more favorable than that of local residents, of citizens, this is a very sure criteria that you're dealing with a tax haven, a country which is specializing actually from hiding some amounts of money from from outside. It is quite typical of tax haven that they give a much harsher time to their citizens than they do to outsiders. A famous case is a part of Great Britain, the island of Jersey. The island of Jersey is famous for being probably the first tax haven in the world by size, but for being also extremely harsh on its own citizens in that respect, showing the difference in treatment. In the case of Cyprus, in the case of Cyprus, it is acting as a tax haven essentially for Russia, for Great Britain, and for Hungary. Russia currently is has developed a policy of trying to get out of the system of tax haven. I was hesitating because the term used is de-offshoreization. Offshore is also a term being used for a tax haven. You say an offshore type of state. Russia has got an official policy of trying to get out of the system of tax havens. And so when measures were decided on last Friday on what to do, it was expected that any measures that would be harsh on people who have put their money in accounts in Cyprus in order to evade the fiscal system in Russia, that Russia would actually welcome this. It turns out it did not welcome it, and it's part of the current discussions that Russia is quite, how would I say, angry about the way that the solutions were been proposed by the troika, by the combination of European Central Bank, European Commission, and International Monetary Fund. And the fact that there's an official position from the country that it is fighting the existence of tax havens, but that it reacts with violence to the fact that tax haven would be threatened, shows the ambiguity, the ambivalence that countries have towards the existence of these tax havens. They're all prepared to be very harsh to those who are totally disconnected with their own activity, although there are very few countries which have not major banks which have open branches in these tax havens. But as soon as it comes close to home, the attitude changes entirely. The solution that was developed on Friday, and it's, I would say, totally historical because we've moved away entirely since then from that, was the following. You know that if you have money on a deposit account in a bank, there is a measure which, at the level of the Eurozone, which protects that money against being lost. For the first 100,000 euros, there is a guarantee that nothing will happen to it. As I said, Cyprus is part of the the Eurozone, and therefore that measure should normally apply. But among the measure that was taken on Friday was the following. Any money that's on accounts for an amount less than 100,000 would be taxed by 6.75%, and any money above that amount would be taxed by 9.9%. Why these particular figures? They were actually devised by the Cypriot government from the principle that they do want to keep their status of tax haven. They don't want to hit too much these non-residents that have put money on accounts on the bank. And the president had said that he was setting a cap of 10% on how much any of the money on the accounts would be would be taxed. Therefrom, the 9.9, the first draft of the project had said that nobody that had only 100,000 or less should be hit. But if you put the cap of 9.9 on the higher accounts, the calculation back shows you that you have to tax anyway the people who have less money on their account, less than 100,000, and the calculation brings the figure of 6.75. But it's not only the sovereign debt, which is in major trouble on Cyprus. It is also the case of the two major banks of the island, which are on the brink of being insolvent. They could be rescued by a European fund, which it's called the emergency emergency lending assistance, as far as I remember, right? It is a fund which may help banks, but there is a condition attached to it within the European bank system, which is it cannot be used for banks that show to be already insolvent, meaning that the only solution for them would be to default. Defaulting in this case means the following, just like an example I gave about Greece. In a case of default, we turn to the debitors, the people that money is owed to. You open the chest and you say, well, you look at how much money is left, and you make a calculation, like I said, about Greece. You say, okay, I owe you a million, but there's only 200,000 in the chest. So the only thing I can give you is 20% on the money that you actually that I owe you, and that's the way that this is being done. This measure that was proposed on Friday was created immediate uproar in the population, and not only in the population. If you look at the financial newspapers over the world, there's a famous columnist in the Financial Times, a person called Wolfgang Münchau, and he wrote a piece which says this is a recipe for a bank run. What is a bank run? It's when people put money in a bank, and you need to know that when you put money in a bank, you've actually given it to the bank. The laws are clear about that. It's not your money. It's been given to the bank, and the bank needs to pay it back to you. And it gives you a statement that says, okay, you've got that on the account, and it will be paid back. But the ownership, the property, has been effectively been transmitted to the bank. In most countries now, you have that measure that says that for money that needs to be paid to you, like let's say for your wage, that if it's above a particular amount, it should be not given to you as a check, but it should be put on a bank account. That measure seems like nothing, but it implies that the law tells you that for amounts that are due to you, you have to release the ownership by accepting that it will go straight into a bank account. The difference between that property ownership being here or there doesn't make any difference, I would say, in normal times, in terms of plenty. It's only in times, like in times of crisis, of course, that it leads to that the issues involved, linked to that, appear to the surface. So when that proposal was made on Friday, there was an outcry, and I say not only within Cyprus, but all over the world, saying we all understood that Europe, the Central European Bank, had guaranteed, or something had guaranteed, that if you have less than 100,000, these are guaranteed. And here in Cyprus, which is part of the Eurozone, the measure was taken that that seems to break that, breach that principle. I need to add that there is an attempt which was discussed, let's say 6 months ago, was introduced, and we understood that there would be a very quick move towards that there would be a special fund at European level in order to guarantee these amounts in the on the deposit accounts. But that measure has been stalled, and it hasn't made much progress. Germany, in particular, is not very, how would I say, enthusiastic about the money in question. Current discussions are trying to set something altogether different, to protect money on the accounts, to create a kind of bad bank in order to move on. Why? Because there's a deadline now. Next Monday, that ELA, emergency lending assistance, will come to an end. The offer from the European Central Bank to help the banks will come to an end. So a solution needs to be found before Monday. If a solution is not found, I think the crisis will develop even further. We need to look at that issue. As I said, there's something at first sight quite suspicious in the fact that here's a country, Russia, says it's fighting tax havens, but as soon as the main tax haven that's concerned by the country, the main investor in Russia is Cyprus. It seems, of course, ridiculous if you think of the size of the economy of Cyprus. But what happens? Money comes from, money evades the Russian system, goes into Cyprus. It evades taxation probably, but probably something else too that I will talk about. And then, because it's Russian money anyway, it is reinvested within the country. Why is it there, therefore? Why do we think, what are possible hypotheses why a country says fighting tax havens has an opportunity to have the tax evaders being really punished? Because one of the figures that was mentioned at some point was that these amounts above 100,000 would be taxed by an amount of 40%. Why is it reacting in the way it is? What is often said about tax havens is that they launder money. That money that comes from illegal activities are being reinjected in the system in some way, and that the anonymity, the secrecy around these accounts is one way for illegal money to get back into the system. And this is something which is probably important in this issue here. Money from prostitution, money from drug traffic, from illegal weapon traffic. It is somewhere. Is it totally outside the system? Is there a total parallel economy, or is that money reinjected in the normal system in one way or other? In tax havens, because of the anonymity, secrecy they offer, is probably the place where that money gets back into the system. There is an incident which happened, I would say about a year ago, which is a British bank called HSBC, which is an important, the main bank actually in England. The HB, as from beginning, linked to its origin. There is a connection between that bank and some of the former colonies of Britain. And that bank was actually submitted to a very heavy fine in terms of hundreds of millions of dollars because it was laundering money coming from illegal activities. And there was a outcry again in the financial press to the fact that it was only not only wasn't the bank prevented from going on with these type of activities, there was no ban on any of its activities, it was just a fine. And no one of its leaders was indicted in any way. It seemed like a perfect case where you would have actually the responsibility of the leaders of that bank to be involved in what is what is happening there. And some of the commentators said, well, this is probably because the fact that bank was caught red-handed, getting some of the dirty money back into the system, there must be some kind of realpolitik, meaning that we all know that that money has to come back into the system one way or other. So they're being slapped on their hand, but it would be harsh to condemn, indict any of their leaders, because everybody knows that, you know, that's the way that business is dealt with. And there might be something connected to that, to the reason why Russia, at the same time as it claims that it's trying to get rid of any of this, its tax havens, is actually reacting so violently when they're actually being involved in some punishment. It probably shows that every economy needs that dirty money gets back into the system in one way or other. There's a rumor that was very much in the financial milieu. If you look at blogs, let's say in the period of the final term, the final quarter of 2008, a lot of the insiders were claiming that a large amount of the money that was injected in the system in order to save it was actually dirty money, but there was no real evidence for that. How does that system work, and how can we bring that issue of redistribution of wealth into the discussion when we try to understand how these things work? Something happened in law in the 19th century. It was realized that a company should be treated as an entity which has a legal existence. The pattern, the model, which seemed obvious, was to regard that a company is to some extent like an individual, like a person. And when legislators tried to define a particular status for companies, the first thing they did is copy that status from what applies to an individual. It has its rights, which are of similar nature. It has duties of a similar nature. But something became very evident from the very beginning. You could not really treat a company like a person, because a person dies and the rights of that person die with him or her. It would be very unfair to the workers in a company if the company had to die when its owner dies. It needs to have some continuity. It needs to have the possibility to keep on living, although the person of the head of the company is actually disappeared. So from that point, and it needs to be said that all the legislation that defines these different statuses of what became called the moral person, as opposed to a physical person, being an individual, that all the precedents, the writing of these laws and the precedents in law were all developed at different times, essentially in the second half of the 19th century in the United States. There is a status which is called a trust. A trust is the following. A trust allows a physical person to transmit his or her wealth to a moral person, something that has a status, a bit like a venture, a commercial venture, an institution of something which is made out of assets and liabilities, but which is not a person. It is part of the British law from the started also at I would say probably the trust is probably older than the notion of moral person. Lawyers will, specialists will correct me on this. A trust allows you to transmit your property to a moral person, and from then on some representatives of the trust will make the decisions of what happened to that money. Tax havens make it possible, through connection between different trusts, that the person who gave his or her money to a trust will end up, through secrecy and delegation, being able to be back being the person that actually gives the instruction of what that money will go. Over the years, moral persons have become much more powerful than individuals. The duties of individuals have been added, augmented, and their rights have been restricted. Nothing of the type really happened to the moral persons, companies. Their property rights are much less open to being open to litigation, to being removed for some state or other reason, and so on. For that reason, it is interesting for an individual to put himself or herself in that position of, through a loop through tax havens, to being the person who has established a trust and ends up giving the orders to a trust, because it makes it possible for that individual to end up having rights which are these augmented rights, which are attached to a trust. There's one measure that was taken in the very beginning of, I think it was in January of 2009, by the Supreme Court in the United States, which I think is very illustrative, illuminating in that respect, because it shows you exactly what happens. There is a tradition in the United States, and it's linked to the way that the Supreme Court is being appointed, that its composition is made out of very conservative people. The Supreme Court, over the whole history of the United States, has been much more conservative than the population as a whole, than the representative in Congress and in the Senate. There was a fright when Mr. Obama was first elected at the end of 2008, that he would be an extremely progressive person, that he may be somebody in the nature of a Franklin Delano Roosevelt that would combat, that would struggle in a very determined way against the financial milieu. And as soon as Mr. Obama was not appointed, but inaugurated in his presidency, the Supreme Court took the following measure. It decided that although there's a cap on how much physical persons, individuals, how much money they can assign to supporting their candidates in the elections. And it was interestingly the opponent of Mr. Obama, Mr. McCain, who had been was a Democratic senator, Madame Feldstein, who had proposed a rule and which had been adopted as a law that is capping how much money individuals can put in political campaigns. But immediately then, as Mr. Obama is appointed, the Supreme Court takes a measure telling that moral persons have no limitation in how much money they can input into the system supporting candidates. So there's an imbalance that is introduced within the system. An individual can put, I think it's in terms of something like $8,000, if $8,500 as far as I remember, an individual can put, and a company can input whatever amount they wish to support a candidate. If you think then that through that system of trusts, it is possible for an individual to actually have, through some intermediaries, to have the power assigned normally to a moral person rather than an individual, you realize what influence some individuals who have that possibility can have on the political system. It means that, let's say you are at the head of a company that can input as much money as it wishes into the system, it means that you will just be competing in an electoral campaign, voting ballot campaign. You will be able to put 10 million to support your candidate, while the ordinary citizen will be able to put as much as $8,500. And that reinstates, in fact, that traditional system that was proposed, and actually most democracies started that way, that you could actually, that your right to vote was linked to some amount of ownership that you would have. At the very beginning of the French Revolution, some votes were in that way assigned to the fact that you had to show some property in order to be able to vote. Little by little, we moved to a universal system of ballot where one individual, one vote. But you understand that through that system I just described, it has very much, at least in the United States, very much stopped to being that case. There is a figure I reminded in a short introduction I gave to Mr. De Gucht yesterday. I reminded him that the current figures from the 2010 census in the United States show that half of the population of the United States, the people are less, I would say the less affluent people, share 2.44% of the wealth of the whole country. And you know, it's an epidemic. And you know that the people have been protesting in the United States, especially 2010, the Occupy Wall Street movement. They call themselves often also, we are the 99%. And why that particular figure? Well, precisely because the one top 40%, the one top percent of the population shares 40% of the wealth of the country. So this is a very imbalanced situation. You may think that a lot of these people in the 1% at the top are people who have access to a particular trust and can actually act, as I said, within the political system as if they were a moral person rather than an individual. So it is typical, and John Kenneth Galbraith, a great, famous American economist, wrote, who died many years ago, but let's say in the 1960s and the 70s, he was one of the main American economists. He was an economic advisor in particular to John Fitzgerald Kennedy when he was a president. And he said, he wrote a book about the crisis of 1929, and he says people have often the feeling that within a crisis period that things starts working in a very different way that it works otherwise. And we could say that possibly about what we see currently developing in the crisis related to Cyprus, or if we think, let's say at the time when there was a heated debate about the future of the Eurozone like a year ago, he said you may think that in a time of crisis things start working differently because suddenly you get an explanation of how the system works that has nothing to do with what you heard before. But he says that's not what is the case. What is the case is that in times of crisis, the very logic of the system, the way it behaves usually, comes suddenly to the surface. It comes to a surface, it becomes some aspect that were invisible, but were still there, become visible. If you think of, if you want to capture the invisible man, you can put some curtains or something, and suddenly you will see the shape of the invisible man being in that net that you've drawn or in the curtain you've put there. But doesn't mean he was not there before. It's just he gets caught, and suddenly the picture becomes apparent. There is, I'll give you an example which is totally unrelated to what I've said so far, but which is relevant to my own field work as an anthropologist among French fishermen, I was told once about a particular fisherman. I was told, there's a man still living there in Le Croisic, and that man is a kind of fossil. He's a man who did fishing. At the time it was sail fishing, that there were no engines on the boats. And people said, you need to interview that man before he dies. And indeed, the fishing was not of the same nature in those days. Why? Because you never knew really in advance when your boat would be back home, because there might be some wind suddenly, fall in the wind, and you would be able to, and also going somewhere, well, you depended on how much wind there was. And so that man, when I interviewed him, told me about interesting anecdotes. For instance, that there was a train. It was the beginning of having these lines of train. There was a train that was going between his port of Le Croisic, was going to Nantes, and Nantes was the way to go to a big town where you could sell fish easily, and the train would go on then from Nantes to Paris. But you were there with your boat, not entirely sure about when that boat would come back. And so what would you do? You would have a stagecoach system on the side, that if the boat was late, you would have that stagecoach with horses, and that would race with the train in order to get to the next station or the one later on, in order to just get in time to put your fish on the boat, on the train that was going to Paris. But what he told me essentially, I was about the way that the prices were formed. He told me he had still logbooks where he had written how much fish or how much crab or how much lobster he had sold, for what price, and so on. And because I was very interested in price formation, I asked him if I could borrow that from him. And he gave that to me. And I said, before he gave it to me, I said, how was the price formed? He said, well, the law of supply and demand. I mean, there was a lot of fish, well, then you get less for the less money, and when there's little, well, they will pay more. Sounded perfectly convincing. But when I read his books, I saw that he was mentioning things of the type. But most of the time he was writing taxation. So when I went back to him and I said, well, most of the time it says taxation. Oh, he says, that's an exception. I said, it can't be an exception. It was most of the time. He said, no, because that was not supply and demand, so that was exceptional. And I said, but I've looked, it was 55%, I don't remember the exact figure. It's more, a majority of the time. He said, well, yeah, well, maybe a majority, but that was still exceptional. That was not the way that the system was supposed to work. So I said, what is taxation? And it's an old term that doesn't refer to tax at all. It means arrangement, agreement. It means an agreement. And I said, so how did that work? He said, well, I mean, on those days, you would go to see the men from the cannery or the tinnery, whether you speak American or English from England. You would go to people who would put the sardines in the cans or in the tins. And he would say to you, all the fishermen would be there, he said, I can only pay so much now for the fish. And I can only get 200 kilos from every boat. So if there are 4 men on the boat, not more than 50 kilos, and I'll pay that particular price. And the fishermen would say, but at that price we can't survive, we can't live, we can't feed ourselves, our families, we can't get clothes from the family. And the man from the cannery would say, well, okay, just a little bit more. And the fisherman would say, no, I want a lot more than that. And then say, well, that's it, that's over. I close the cannery then in that case, because I can't feed my own family in those particular terms. And it would be bargaining, and they would decide about the price, about the quantity, and so on. Now, in the explanation of fishermen, he said that was crisis time. That was a crisis time. That was exceptional. But it was not. It was the rule. It was the way it worked. The reason why he called it crisis is because the system was shown on the surface. The system was shown that how it actually worked, which was an understanding between the parties involved. It's just in the same way as when there's issuance of debt by a particular country. as you know, the system that you try to organize. So there are different ways. There might be a way that there's a particular bank that's going to deal with the whole thing and trying to find the clients. But often, the most common situation is the following. So say the country would like to issue so much debt, means let's say 10 million. That's a very low amount. Meaning that the country is looking for lenders for that particular amount. And they ask who is candidate. They ask who is candidate to buy, to get some of that money, and the candidates are supposed to say at what rate they would want to. They're prepared to pay on that money they will lend. And so, what was a system? There's an organization that takes all the offers. Okay, bank so and so is prepared to lend 200,000 euros, and it wants to be paid 2.5% interest rate on that. Another one is prepared to borrow more, but it demands 2.7, so on. So what's done? All the offers are put together, and there is the rate is calculated at which all the actual money that wanted to be borrowed can actually be issued. You set the level at which the country will be able to issue all the money it wanted, and it has to then, if it agrees with the amount that's being calculated, then that's the interest rate that will be paid to the countries. So let's say that it ends up being set at 2.5%. The people who say they demanded 3.5, they're out of the race. They will not be candidate accepted. But those who made offers up to 2.5, like 175% or 2%, they will be able to lend and obtain these 2.5. There's some alternative system with those who said they were prepared to get it for 1.75 would actually get at that particular level. But usually it's set at the level where the whole offer is being absorbed by the particular market. This is a system which, if we wanted to get it out of the craziness of the current high-frequency trading on the stock exchange, this is a system that could just as well be used. We would ask in the morning who's prepared to sell shares of stock of the Exxon company and who's prepared to sell. And there would be the same calculation with people who are prepared to buy. They would be asked, at what price are you prepared to buy? And then once the whole offer the supply can be absorbed, that would be the price at which the level would be set. It would make it possible to avoid getting into a system which would be too speculative. We need to stop at 4:15 today, so I'm going to conclude. So there is some time for you to be able to ask some question. The situation in Cyprus is very interesting because, as you know, we have on one side we have a country which is part of the European Eurozone. The euro is the currency. There is some solidarity within the Eurozone system between that country and the rest of the system. It has a problem of being on the brink of default for the country. The main banks are on the brink of default as well. It would be normal that the rest of the Eurozone shows solidarity within the system and helps it out. The reason why it shouldn't be too difficult, at least on the paper, is that the economy of Cyprus represents only 0.2% of the whole of the zone. So it's not a major component. But at the same time, the Eurozone is reluctant to just give that money to help it out because it is a tax haven essentially for countries which are not part of the system. And there's some concern that some of that money may be dirty money. The European taxpayer may not be too happy to help a tax haven from a country from outside. It may be particularly unhappy to pay money for dirty money, repay dirty money. It's last time that I spoke here, I made a remark about the fact that the taxpayer during the heat of the crisis paid not only for, I would say, good hard money that had been lost, but was also asked to pay for a number of bets between a financial institution which had been lost. And you wonder why a lost bet between two banks would be anything that the taxpayer would be concerned with, especially since it multiplied the bill by about 10 times, making it much bigger. At the same time, that reluctance to be too lenient on the side of the European, the Eurozone, is being met with the reality that Russia says, let's be serious, guys. We all know that we need these tax havens. It's not the way it's being phrased, but that we need them. And maybe between brackets, that we need one way to find one way that dirty money gets back into the system, because it may turn out to be quite helpful in some situation. This is the way that, as I said, that the system actually comes to the surface, that suddenly these hidden mechanism becomes pretty visible to anyone. And that we see in particular that in terms of the redistribution of the wealth, that there are very different types of people. There are, in this case, in the United States you have that division between the 99% and the 1%. And in this case, in Cyprus, you have that division which is very much the division between people who have less than 100,000 euros on their account and the people who have probably millions or even billions on their accounts, who are not the same. And that the people who have less than 100,000 are probably people who, in any electoral process, in the democracy of voting, that their vote is probably really counted as one, while the people who have the possibility of having millions or billions on their account are probably people who found access to these moral persons that give them the rights of moral persons. And in that, I would say, caricature of situation of the United States currently, that they can put any money they want in the system in order to have their own candidates being elected. So this is a time when I can turn to you and ask you if you have any questions or comments, of course, on what I just said. Yes?
Again, in the case of Cyprus, it's not brand new. It was a situation known for years.
Yes. You knew it, and I knew it, but what about the other people?
There was no reaction from the authorities.
No.
And they had the capacity to react.
Yes. But I don't want to be cruel. You remember the European Community for Coal and Steel, which was the embryo for the common market of 6 nations, which was the core of what became the Eurozone, and Luxembourg was right in the middle. We knew that too.
But it's a kind of impossible situation, because if you look at Ireland,
yes,
tax haven.
Yeah.
Look at Cyprus, tax haven.
Yeah.
Politics from those countries are too happy to, with a warm welcome to foreign companies and foreign money. And that creates jobs. That creates the necessity for new buildings. That creates for the future a possible building crisis. And it's a kind of perpetual chain, renewing with the economical cycles. And we wonder how we will stimulus to make a large favor to one special country or two or three special countries.
Yes, but you remember what happened in October 2008. Sudden realization that some banks are too big to fail. There's a unanimous view in government, in the papers, in the press, and television, radio. There's only one solution: to dismantle these banks, dismantle them into units whose size will be such that they're not systemic, that there's no risk attached. You remember what happened to that proposition? It's gone. When Ireland became insolvent, actually, the first thing that was said was the same unanimity everywhere: it's tax haven, status must go, it's over. There's no way that Eurozone will accept that goes on there. Eurozone will help Ireland, but this is over. Ireland as an international financial center, it's over. What was the fate of that proposal? The same. It's gone. What does that reflect? I don't think there's any alternative to say that it reflects the power balance between the parties which are involved, which is exactly what Mr. Holder, Minister of Justice, Secretary of Justice in the United States, just said when asked, faced with the question from Elizabeth Warren, Barofsky, and the others, why is it none of these people are indicted? He says, well, it's very simple. Between me, Ministry of Justice, and the financial establishment, the power balance is then in their favor. And he said it. I mean, he said it in the congressional. It's on record. It's being filmed. It's being there. It's very realistic, probably, but it's the first time that this was said as openly to describe the situation. Anyone else? Yes?
You're basically describing the problem.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, we know what led to this situation.
Yes.
And clearly, nobody is willing to go back and examine why.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very interesting that in 2008, the German government sold for 2 billion euro submarines to Greece.
Yes.
Right away after, they came down to the Greeks because they were buying things without having money.
Mm-hmm.
We know very well Cyprus and Greece, they have to spend a whole pile of money in weaponry with the problem with the Turkey. We know that Spain and Italy, they have to spend loads of money along with Greece to deal with immigration.
To be?
To deal with immigration.
Yes.
Something that the other European countries do not have.
Mm-hmm.
In 2012, the director of Dexia gave himself a 600,000 euro bonus.
Yes.
6 months later, the bank went bankrupt.
Yes.
No, we know all these things. We know that the people that work for the European Union have very high salaries and very low taxation.
Yes.
Basically, there is a class of people that make the money and ask for the middle and the low class to pay for the bad decisions they have made.
Yes.
How can we expect European Union to sustain financial health
Yes.
if all the decisions that are taken go in this direction?
Yes.
Because it's not the middle class that controls the banks.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's no way we can avoid. I mean, we could be, how would I say, in really bad faith if we were avoiding to raise these issues in a set of lectures where we raise the issue of the ethics of finance. It's important that we do raise these issues, and that also that, and that's why I thought it was important today to use, not to speak in general terms, but to use an illustration on which we can work, because it is very much there in the news, and examine what is the mechanism that's actually being shown there in order to, how do I say, to be able to draw lessons from our understanding of the current situation. Now, in other lectures, I've drawn the attention to the fact that that's something we need to do for the future if we don't want just to, be, how would I say, just passive bystander. it's important that the knowledge which is produced typically, let's say, in universities and among people who reflect about the issues, that it stops being so much disconnected from the decisions which are being made. It looks very much, when you look in retrospect to the 19th century, the 20th century, that there were people who were understanding what was going on, and then there were the people making the decisions, and as if there were the total lack of communication between the two. The very good example that I cite quite often, I may have already mentioned here, either in the course or answering some questions, when Mr. Obama precisely is being appointed. You can look at the papers at the time. You can see, will he appoint Mr. Krugman as being his Secretary of the Treasury and Mr. Stiglitz as being his main advisor, or will it be reversed? And when I was in a press conference of Mr. Krugman recently in Paris, he was asked the question, were you offered any position in the administration? He said there was never any question of that. There was no discussion of the type. So you see, public opinion has got one representation where this idea of a communication between knowledge and decision-making is happening. But you know what happened? It was Mr. Timothy Geithner, who's been accused recently by one of his colleagues that he was simply strategizing all over the period just to get a main position in Citigroup, and Mr. Lawrence Summers, who was the big agent of deregulation under President Clinton, who was appointed as being the main advisor. So once again, I mean that the decision-making circle appointed people from within, and there was not that communication that people thought would be obvious. I mean, myself, when I read that, and I said, yeah, interesting question. Will they use Krugman here and Stiglitz there? And when you ask them, I mean, I don't think, Stiglitz was not there, but I'm pretty sure that I would prepare to bet that he was not even part of discussions either to be part of that administration. He's the person who, at the United Nations, proposed to replace all these G7, G8, G20, to replace them by a G192. But every country would have a voice in the decision of where we go. So I'm certain I haven't answered your question, but I try to set it in the framework of, we're lucky we have a chair of stewardship of finance where we can raise these issues and at least have the possibility maybe to make some progress in the understanding of the machinery. Anyone else? If that's the case, then we will make a short break, and when the break ends, then we'll move into the panel session, which is we're living momentous moments in terms of the understanding how the fiscal system works and how it impacts on everyday life. Unfortunately, it's because there are very serious crises arising, but we need to use that opportunity to keep on reflecting and possibly coming up with suggestions, hoping that these suggestions for once will find its way into the decision making. Thank you.